regional action plan that we call Hílekw Sq'eq'o. Hílekw in Halkamelam is get ready, and Sq'eq'o is together. And a subset of that, resulting from the November 2021 rain event, is we brought a whole bunch of brilliant people together and created a Build Back Better Together collaborative. So I'll speak to both of those. The Hílekw Sq'eq'o is driven by our Emergency Planning Secretariat office. We're a very small body. My early thoughts there in the creation of that body was we want a small, apolitical, non-political body that could help facilitate, help build capacity, help connect our 31 mainland Coast Salish communities around a common objective with regards to emergency management, climate change, capacity development, and whatnot. And to be clear, when I talk about capacity development, I try not to use that broadly because it's overused. I'm really thinking of the skills and competencies our communities need to prepare for, participate in, and respond to emergencies of all sorts. We do have an all hazards mandate, but just if you think about the complexity of 31 of our communities here in the lower, what's called the lower mainland, Vancouver is a part of us here, and a couple of million others living in our territory here, the complexity of an all hazards mandate. But when you think about flood and wildfire, highway issues, railway issues, smaller, more localized issues, it's huge, right? But in that, we had conversations about to historically, because we're all related, like we cover from Yale First Nation to Semiahmoo to Squamish. We're the same people, Lily. We speak a couple of different dialects, but the same spirituality, the same heritage, and chances are we've got really close blood relatives in each of our communities. So recognizing that sense of nationhood, trying to get away from the Indian Act process and the move by governments to engage our ancient villages that are now covered under the Indian Act as Indian Act bands, from supporting them in such a way that you might have one of our communities might be, say, 100, 150 members, but the government is promoting them as a nation. And I really push back on that, Lily, because my definition of a nation is common language, common heritage, common spirituality. And in that case, that's our 31 of our communities on the mainland. We've got about 20 more on Vancouver Island and about 20 more in Washington State. So collectively, we are the Coast Salish Nation. But we feel we're big enough here with 31 communities, about 13,000 citizens. We're big enough to move as a block, right? A collaborative block. So in those earlier discussions is how do we bring our own folks together, knowing one, the human resources we have to on any manner of emergency management is very limited within our 31 communities. We know all of our communities are short of staff. People are doing double duty. They're taking things on the side of their desk. So the purpose of it is called the Emergency Planning Secretariat. I'll use the acronym EPS. The purpose of the EPS is to streamline and make things more efficient, make things more easy for our community. But we've got seven staff members in the EPS right now. Debbie is here with us. I got other staff. The First Nations Emergency Services Society is doing a roadshow and a couple of things. So we're stretched out a little bit here, but it's just the nature of our work that I'd rather have my 4 staff being really busy, making it easier for our communities, and our communities seem to relate to that and appreciating it. So and I think it's also important to share a little bit how we started. Prior to 2017, I didn't know anything about emergency management. There's no leaders, and I say that in quotation marks, in the Stalo country here around emergency management in a way that's bringing communities together like we are now. So we were born from the provincial and federal government wanting to create what is called the Lower Mainland Flood Management Strategy, led by the Fraser Basin Council, which is a provincial agency here in BC. They do a broad spectrum of work. A lot of research and reports come out of them. And Along the way, as we were building capacity, as I was building capacity, our team, my leadership team consists of chiefs and counselors throughout the valley and the mainland. And, we're learning together. We're picking up things like the Sendai Framework and disaster risk reduction, reading it, interpreting it, understanding it, and advancing, right? So I think it's really important to share, Lily, that we learn quickly and we continue to learn. We want to bring more brilliant minds together to assist us in learning, right? So if you can think about uh, First Nations leaders, chiefs and counselors, developing capacity, developing experiences on emergency management, emergency response, and here's this agency creating a flood strategy, and naturally we're going to put in Section 35 rights, recognizing, affirming our rights, put in our inherent rights, take key articles of the Declaration. Article 29 stands out for me, our right to protect and conserve our environment. Article 32, the requirement for free, prior, and informed consent for any development on our lands. Article 18, our right to be involved in discussions that affect our rights. And naturally, Article 19, that speaks to free, prior, and informed consent more broadly. But building that, because, I'm sure that there's a lot of folks online here that, take who we are naturally. We advance who we are quite similarly, taking things like Section 35, inherent right, the Declaration, taking jurisprudence such as Tselhqot'in Supreme Court decision really stands out for me, because not only does it recognize we have title to our territorial lands, there's an economic benefit to that title. So it advances significantly, right? But we also use some really what I call foundational decisions coming out of the Canadian legal system around Delgamuukw, for example, around our oral testimony and consultation, around one of our relatives here from Musqueam, the Sparrow decision, which is really around fish, but it gives clarity on the necessity for government to engage us differently when they're infringing on our rights. And I would argue that in the Crown state, whether that be, and keep in mind, I'm not a lawyer or anything like that, but whether you're the provincial Crown or federal Crown, you have to behave with the honor of the Crown. You have to maintain your fiduciary obligation to us. So, and in our case here, our biggest struggle is that Crown's delegation of authority to local governments, to towns and regional districts and whatnot. But it just because they haven't done it effectively doesn't mean they can vacate that field. So putting all those things, and I'm sure this isn't new to a lot of you, is just doing what we can to represent and advocate for our base rights, our base interests, to create different space to have different discussions. So as the lower mainland flood strategy is rolling out, it got to a point where it was time to develop or present a strategy out to the broad public audience. And although we're a part of the development of it, we're still disconnected, right? Because we're working with, and I'm sure everybody here is familiar with, when we walk into a room, we're bringing our title with us, our rights with us, our thousands and thousands of years of history, our culture, our tradition, our spirituality, we bring everything with us all the time because we can't let it go, right? It's too important. We have too many obligations to our future generations to put it down at any time. But we're across the table, you're sitting with agencies that don't have enough authority to recognize our rights, to respond to our rights in an effective way. And in this case, it really played out when, given this is a broad audience, Lily, not everybody may know that with the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it's actually enshrined in provincial legislation here in British Columbia. So it is a part of our legal landscape here in BC, and more recently federally with the United Nations Declaration Act. So it's a changing, evolving legal landscape, right? But when you have an agency that doesn't recognize their rights, they do how it is described, Lily, as some silly stuff. Like in the strategy, they're asking Joe Blow public, should the declaration apply to the strategy? Holy smokes, you could walk up and, I'm not physical, I'm not suggesting I am, but you want to kind of butt somebody in the side of the head to wake them up, right? So it came to a head a few times there where we felt really strongly that our rights weren't being recognized or promoted or respected in the strategy. So it got to the point where we just stepped out. You can only be frustrated so long before you get angry and upset. So we stepped out before we got overly upset. And this is a pivotal piece for me and us, Lily, because we're born responding to somebody else's strategy, born responding without recognition of who we are, our rights and whatnot. And this is taking rights and applying it to that emergency management landscape that we're just learning and building our scenarios and business cases on, whether it be the modification of the landscape to protect human interest. And I say human interest because I know a lot of you are like us, where this is so much more than human interests. We're really interested in a broad ecological footprint, that broad natural landscape. So not only was it the lack of recognition of rights, it was lack of recognition of doing things as resilient as possible, as nature-based as possible. So the pivotal piece for me and us, Lily, was because we were born responding. They do something, we'd respond. They do something, say something, print something, we'd respond. When we stepped out of that, we kind of sat across the table from each other, looking at us. Well, what do we do? Now that we don't have to respond to anybody, what is it we're doing? Where are we going? What are our priorities? And how do we get there? So it really didn't take long, Lily, for us to have a conversation just amongst ourselves, nobody else, no government, just ourselves. Is how do we advance this in the most strategic, efficient way that would be challenged the least by government, by the public, by both orders of government in particular. So the first thing that came to mind was the Sendai Framework. If we use that as a foundation, who can argue it? Because BC's endorsed it and Canada's endorsed it. And, it's a global instrument. So we put that on the table, and I started learning about it. And how do we apply it? And what resonated with us right away, Lily, was that the whole of society approach in Sendai, which is typically how we are. We don't go out as a leader. I don't go out and make decisions arbitrarily and disconnected from my members. I want to engage them on a regular basis, update them, get their advice and get their direction. So it's a two-way conversation, right? Which is very much how we should be. I know the Indian Act is changing that, but we should be. So when we put Sendai on the table, with the first pillar being understanding the risk, and this is, I think, where some of the uniqueness of what it is that we're doing, Lily, comes out, is they typically, I'm not sure how it is in other jurisdictions, but in BC, whether it be a wildfire or flood in particular, people don't even put earthquake on the table because it's too scary. We are absolutely not prepared for earthquakes. So we're not even talking about it or planning it in an effective way, right? So quite often we focus on wildfires and floods. And in that scenario, the human-centric nature of provincial and federal agencies around, if there's a wildfire and there's no people and no houses, barns in the way, let it burn. If there's a flood coming down the river and there's no houses or human impacted, let it do what it wants to do. But as soon as there's a human interest in there, they jump in and do everything. Well, and I get it. This is whether it's a federal government or provincial government, they're still young, right, Lily? They're not even teenagers yet in terms of governance compared to our thousands and thousands of years of governance and looking after things broadly. So I get that. But the uniqueness that we're adding is those the more of the landscape that's not only important to us as First Nations, but they're just important, period, right? Well, whether you put species at risk on the table or microclimates that are growing certain things that we harvest that only grow in certain areas, putting who we are on there, on not only on the map, but the plan as well, the strategy, the action, the capacity development, we're there. And then as we continue to dialogue on that risk factor, we took a look at ISO 31000, which speaks to managing risk. So initially, we put the Sendai and ISO 31000 on the table, jurisprudence, Tselhqot'in in particular, on the table. We started having a dialogue looking at Sendai's call for a regional action plan. And how do we formulate this in a strategy that one, people can see that our people can see themselves in, because that's the most critical piece. Is it's about our values, our really site specific areas of importance to us, um, our recognition that we've got non-human relations that we have an obligation to care for, whether they be the salmon people or the sturgeon. So some of our communities have blood relation to sturgeon, Lily. Others have blood relations to what is now called the um, beaver, to certain ducks and whatnot. Because we've been here long enough. We used to have a common language. Like I'm sure many of you here, you had a common language with those non-human beings, and we kind of evolved over time, but we're still reliant on them for sustenance, right? So we've got ancient relations that we want to protect in a strategy. So as we teased apart, continue to tease apart Sendai, because that's really the foundational piece of what it is we're doing, right? This we started learning new. We're put in a situation to forced to learn new terminology. Whoever thought of heard of a heat dome prior to the summer of 2021, and Lytton getting up to 50? And this is a kind of weird, Lily, because our relatives in Lily were watching their thermometers reach 50, 51, 51 and a half, 52 degrees, yet publicly it's announced as it maxed out at 48 or something. It was 50 plus degree weather over a sustained time. We never seen that before. And then having the entire town of Lytton wiped out as a result of fire, that's unprecedented as well. And then in the same year, in November comes along, and we learn this thing about an atmospheric river and a pluvial event, and the results of that. And I should share with folks that our pluvial event of November 2021 was based on about 5 inches, 5.5 inches of rain over a 24-hour period, and it had a devastating effect. And then just a couple months ago, you're familiar with northern Texas, got 23 inches of rain in 24 hours. Now look what California is going through. So it's becoming the norm, right? So in in us learning about this new norm, or trying to factor in some new norm around some temperatures that are unprecedented, what it is that it's doing to our landscape, we've got although this started in November 2021, we still have a tremendous amount of waterways that are much below average in terms of water volume and flow throughout the province. And even here in the Lower Mainland, I've got a slough next to my community of Seabird here. There's coho spawning right now, and it's really unusual that you can see every coho bed, because typically the water is 4 or 5 feet higher than it is now, and you never see it, right? But now they're literally, their fins are touching the surface of the water as they're spawning. So the 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 intent of applying foundational instruments, I'd call it, like Sendai in particular, and jurisprudence with our knowledge of the landscape, imparting our values to the landscape. we started flowing out the action plan called Hílekw Sq'eq'o. I would have loved to shared it with you here now, Lily, but I haven't presented it to all of our communities yet. And there's been a few reasons why, but I just, as earlier this week, I impressed upon my team, we need to get it out to the communities, to present to them, to get feedback from them, and then we can make it more public after that. And I should share that the intent there is that this is our plan. We're drafting the plan for our own purposes, our own needs, that reflects who we are. Following Sendai, of course, and in following Sendai, we and living through Lytton and November 2021, we realized that the whole ESS side of EM here in BC is completely inadequate. It's not developed or maintained in a way that has folks displaced for, an entire town displaced for a year or more, or 100 people here, 100 people there. So again, we took a look out, well, what good practices might we be able to borrow and bring into our fold here? So we took a look at the United Nations SPHERE program, or SPHERE model, which really speaks to more to humanitarian aid, that takes into account culture and tradition and spirituality, and so easy to apply it on a long-term basis and a short-term basis, right? So we're building that into our model. And then coming back to one of my opening comments, Lily, around capacity, skills, and competency. Um, the the existing training, whether it be provided by the province, the federal government, or any other service provider, doesn't meet our needs. Not only in terms of pedagogy and delivery, but content, and it's all human centric. It doesn't allow us to bring in our other relations and other priorities. So and then in that I've got a leadership background in education, so I know that from early childhood to post-secondary, and in that hat, we know that you can't take canned off-the-shelf training programs, deliver it to our citizens, and expect them to walk out with the skills and competencies that you think they'd have or should have as a result. And it's particularly harmful when they receive a certificate that says they've completed this, but they don't have the full skills and competencies to do that. So, like, even as chair of Seabird College here in Seabird, we might take a canned program, and whether it's early childhood education, health, or plumbing, carpentry, whatever it is, we put who we are in it. We create space for elder involvement, elder support. We introduce some of our language into it. We build in the space and time for basic life skills if those students need it. And the students are of all ages. So happy. I can still picture, Lily, that one of our grandmothers graduated with their adult dogwood, which is our graduation program here in BC, and a certificate in early childhood education. And the night of our celebration, she turned 65. That's just tremendous, right? So we know what we need to do to bring our citizens along in a way that, some might hit the ground running and they're fine. Let them go. Others need, a little bit more support. They need different tacks and different approaches to what it is they're learning. You need to come back and revisit and regularly, and we do that often enough, and they actually build this. And I should say, although we all learn differently, everyone has the ability to learn the skills and competencies. It's how we get their changes, and is unique to their needs. So because of that, we're building out what we call a tactile capacity development plan. And we purposely put tactile in there because we didn't want to bring 200 of our 13,000 members together and do some training on ICS 100 and 200, and here's your certificate and away you go kind of thing. We're beyond that. So it's got to be tactile. It's got to be relevant to them. It's got to be hands-on and real world experiences. So we're bridging that training with mock exercises, real world exercises. So you put the skills to use on a regular basis. So, you don't forget them. Because remember, everybody's working off the side of their desk. So, the chances of me forgetting something is elevated because we're doing so many things. But if you have exercises, you build in that routine, you maintain it over time. Then it just promotes that not only of the retention of the knowledge, but the ability for people to grow. To build that knowledge based on experience. And we're in a position, I'm sure many of you on the line are similar too, where there might be an emergency exercise here in our backyard, and regularly I get an invite letter. Hey, I'm invited out to this Trans Mountain mock exercise to be a guest, to be a spectator. Oh, heck with that. I want to take Stalo people in there. I want Debbie Coombs online here. I want her to be the director of logistics in a Trans Mountain exercise or a local municipal exercise. We want to occupy those seats as opposed to being guests and visitors. And I would argue, who better to occupy those seats than us, given our relation to the land, given the importance of doing good things good and the right way for the right reasons, as opposed to industry-weighted reasons or government human-centric only priorities, right? So building all of that out. just being cognizant of the time, I'm going to try. So that's in development. In the next couple of months, I'd love to share it, present to you, Lily, at one of the upcoming events, and what Hílekw Sq'eq'o is and continues to grow to be, and just the nature of who we are as we develop it. We're continually learning, continually modifying it, and editing it, updating it. The more bright minds we bring in, the better product in the end. But it's just our nature. We don't write something that's, we never change it. We revisit it, we improve it, we make it better all the time, right? So just coming back to the Build Back Better piece, because of the November 2021 event and our team's experience on government in particular, we've seen as an opportunity to jump in front of government and both British Columbia and Canada on the Sendai's approach to, or at least our interpretation of Sendai's approach to Build Back Better. Keep in mind that prior to November 2020, actually prior to December 14th, 2021, neither BC or Canada had a Build Back Better policy. Neither of them had a funding methodology that supports and promotes Build Back Better. So I was in one of my hats. I was at a BC Fed committee called I got to look at it all the time, the Committee of BC and Canada on Disaster Response and Climate Resilience. That was 14 federal departments and 9 provincial ministries coming together responding to the November 2021 pluvial event. And in there, we had the opportunity to introduce ideas of what Build Back Better is. And Minister Blair's response to that was changing one of the funding pots to allow for 15% of that fund to be spent on Build Back Better. But our concern here is that the province of BC still doesn't have a Build Back Better policy or funding methodology. So we brought some, I was in a really fortunate position to bring some brilliant minds together from my Emergency Planning Secretariat. I'm also President of Tribal Chiefs of Stala Tribal Council. We brought together the UBC Coastal Adaptation Lab from the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at UBC, West Coast Environmental Law, Ebbwater Consulting, Watershed Watch Salmon Society, Resilient Waters Project, and Farmland Advantage, and Curwood Lydell. And we started putting forward some priorities that have people thinking differently and how to reduce risk when it comes to climate change and climate disaster. Advancing reconciliation, whether that be a legal reconciliation like Tselhqot'in, or legal aspects, or how government might interpret legal aspects of Sendai in here in the Lower Mainland. And how do we advance that? And how do you advance reconciliation in such a way that, and I challenge government on a regular basis, and a number of hats that I wear is, as an agent of the Crown, what gives you confidence that the folks sitting across the table have the skills, the competency, the experience, the subject matter expertise to engage you on any different topic or subject or whatnot? So it's important to build our skills and competencies so we have the conversations that we need with government and hold it to account. And then because we're in Hílekw Sq'eq'o, we brought in the idea of water storage, building and recreating salmon habitat, promoting that broader ecological footprint. That's got to be front and center on any response, whether it be by provincially or federally, whether it be by policy or by funding methodologies. And really appreciating the part of Sendai is everybody's part of the solution scenario. We continue to promote that. And then, you can't lose sight of sustainable communities and economies. That's ours, the local towns, the cities and whatnot, right? That piece is important. So we brought forward 5 strategies that we wanted to inform government with. And one is to facilitate meetings to develop collaboration here in the Lower Mainland. First Nations, local governments, farmers, the public, other stakeholders. We're the rights holder at every step of the way, but there's a lot of stakeholders we need to bring in too, right? And then in that, build relationships across governments and our communities. So a lot of the local governments here in the Lower Mainland, they don't have any relation with the local Coast Salish community. Some do, and they're great relations, but the majority don't. So that's really important to factor in. Identify specific needs of the region. In November 2021, we lost Highway 1 at Watcombe Road, and it's the third time we lost it. So why is that? Build Back Better says elevate that road by 2 meters and it won't be an issue the next event, right? And it's similar with Highway 7. CNCP had issues, but build in the local priorities, particularly on transportation corridors, and that catches the attention of the federal government because of the Vancouver Port Authority and the need to move goods west to east. Advanced collaborative projects. And this is, I feel really strongly, this is an opportunity for local governments and First Nations to collaborate on strategies, particularly on Build Back Better opportunities where both local governments and the First Nations endorse it and support it. That way we don't have to use the declaration as a club to get local government's attention because we're already there. We built that relation, we're collaborating, we're identifying common priorities, and we're supporting each other there. And then the broad regional piece around building support on what Build Back Better is. Because there's a lot of landowners, there's a lot of farmers, they don't know what it is, they need to be educated on it. I do find that a lot of local governments, they want to embrace Build Back Better, because if a road with a 4-foot culvert gets washed out, right now they can only put a 4-foot culvert back in. And they have engineers that know if they put a 5-foot or 6-foot culvert or put a bridge in, they're not going to have to go back to it in the next event. So they want to build back better too. So build that broader regional support and advance it. So we're continuing to do that. We continue to reach out to government on trying to educate them. You'd heard Blair federally and Farmer provincially talking about Build Back Better. They've even used Build Back Better together publicly, but I really feel strongly government still doesn't quite get it. And on the funding methodology side, I'm not even clear on it. But I should share on one of my hats, I'm a manager of a First Nations civil construction company. So we're actually replace culverts and build roads and build bridges, those kind of things. It's not clear in my mind that, say for example, that 4-foot culvert example, if we have a municipal road with a 4-foot culvert that's washed out to replace it, if you think about the tear down to the foundation of that culvert, whether you put in a 4-foot or a 6-foot culvert, it's the same. But when you put that 6-foot culvert in instead of a 4-foot culvert, there's going to be a cost difference there. But when you pack that around it, when you ensure the substrate is good around it, it's solid, you build it up, you gravel the top, and you pave it, those costs are exactly the same as it would be if it's a 4-foot or 6-foot culvert. So we want to do some cost analysis on, well, what are the real extras when it comes to Build Back Better, because I think it's going to be a lot smaller than government thinks, because right now they're nervous about it, so they don't want to readily fund it. Well, we shared with government, let's do some, let's try some, call it a pilot, whatever you want. Let's try some to figure out what those real costs are and build it out from there. So I'm not sure if we're going to stop there, Lily, and take any questions or comments. That's basically it in a nutshell of where we are with our Hílekw Sq'eq'o and the Build Back Better piece. We're going to have another. We've held 2 regional sessions on Build Back Better in February and August of this past year, and we're hoping to have another one in April. In mid-February, we want to bring all the farmers together and have a conversation with them on what Build Back Better is and whatnot. So we're going to continue advancing, continue rolling it out, and really hoping maybe by summertime, we'll be proposing some language to both levels of government on what a Build Back Better policy needs to include, what a Build Back Better funding methodology needs to include, and just start growing it out from there. Maybe my last comment there, Lily, is we just the approach that we've taken over the last while. We've got our EPS Hílekw Sq'eq'o happening over here. Me and a couple of my staff participate on the Build Back Better piece. But I just on our Build Back Better Together collaborative earlier this week, late last week, I posted to them, I'd really like to slide the whole Build Back Better approach we're building into Hílekw Sq'eq'o. But because they're 2 separate groups right now, giving them time to think about it, I think they will, but when we want to respect them, give them time to think about it, and to really start building it out from there. If I can make one more comment before I open it up, because I think this might come up in the questions. In Sendai, it promotes a whole of society approach throughout. And I purposely stayed away from the ESS side of it for now, because as important as it is, and we are doing work on it, when you look at the U.S. federal government's bill on supporting Sendai and Build Back Better, 90% of it is social, which is huge, but unless we better respond to climate crisis with our protecting infrastructure in a resilient, nature-based fashion, get all of those things in place, I feel really strongly, not only is it going to reduce risk on any infrastructure capital, it's going to reduce risk and hazard and harm to us as well. So we'll get more to that later, but right now we haven't spent much time or thought on that aspect of Sendai.
Everyone, I'm from English River First Nation in northern Saskatchewan, and throughout this, since 2015, we've been developing emergency management plans, and it's during the pandemic, we tried to do a collaborative effort throughout the region, and to some degree, we had some success. So, getting information out was very successful, helping other communities coordinate their efforts, providing the means for isolation, et cetera, et cetera. But we ran into roadblocks with government, kind of trying to undermine a collaborative approach to things. I think they felt it was making us too strong, and we would demand more and more, which we need to do. And with the upcoming, we're watching climate change events daily now, and we're really not well planned, well prepared. But I like the approach that you have, that we also have to include our environmental relations, and because like you, we deal with wildfire and floods primarily. We're not really at risk for earthquakes, but just in Alberta recently, there was an earthquake in northern Alberta, which could have and may have impacted tar sands dikes on their tailings ponds, which would have an impact all over. So, how to, we were in conversations the last few days on how to build this agreement within our region and get people at the table on the same page. So that's kind of where we're at. That's all I wanted to say. If anybody wants to comment on
that. If I could, Candace, replying to that, I haven't been at this too long, but my mentors, in BC, if you're a chief of your community for 25 or more years and you continue contributing, we elevate you to a grand chief. I've got the good fortune of working closely with 3 grand chiefs combined. They've got over 100 years of experience leading communities. And what they share with me, they tried over the years to get our communities to work together, but something always interferes, it externally or internally. So they're really happy that we've got 31 of our communities working together on a common path here. So just recognizing that not precedent setting, because prior to some major events like the BC treaty process, we worked together on anything and everything, right? So that's why I really appreciate Jody Wilson-Raybould's sentiments are coming out from under the Indian Act, recognizing we're related, recognizing the necessity to work together, to recognize the Indian Act is an impediment, so let's push it over there and find ways to work together. So this is really I think the only thing of all of the things on our table, Candace, this is the only thing we're doing as a collective of the 31 communities. We're doing things with smaller subsets of 20 here, 10 there, but this one's got everybody's attention, and I don't take that for granted at all.
Thank you so much to both of you. We'll just open it to any other questions or comments. Anything that comes to mind? If Tyrone, maybe I'll ask on the broken ASS model, which you so eloquently put, and that only really looks for a few days, and then the displaced people are largely on their own or have to figure out other means. What do you see as some of the core steps that need to be taken that could change things?
Our culture and spirituality are huge. we're like the Lytton is the best example of me, Lily, because they're just upriver for me, and a lot of us are actually they're Tselhqot'in people, and I'm Coast Salish, but we're related. I've got uncles and aunties that are Tselhqot'in, so because we're related and we're familiar with each other. When they came into our community because they lost theirs, we'd hold feasts, just share meals together. We'd bring out our drums and have some singing and dancing and whatnot. So that's, as we know, that's medicine for them. So we're happy to do that. And they would come down and look to us as, because they've got aunties and uncles down this way too, right? So that family connection definitely eased it. But I think it really demonstrated for me that the importance of us as a host sharing food, sharing song and medicine with guests, and whether we're related to them or not, it's medicine, right? And then providing space for them. If some of them want to bring their drums together and do something similar, we welcome that. And a lot of us participated in it as well. So it's a cultural sharing, that's got to be built into it naturally. And then we hosted a whole bunch of them just in a camp just up from me. I think at one point there would have been 200 Lyttons staying in there at one time. But I think they're staying in a camp for, and this is like there's houses, there's units and whatnot. It's called a camp, but it's pretty well established, where somebody else is doing the cooking, somebody else is in control of the diet and the meal prep, all those kind of things. And when I heard some of the elders, we wish we were a fish. And I've actually got to drive by that camp to and from my fish camp. So I'd stop in and drop off some filleted salmon, and did that a couple of times. Then we heard elders asking for, the fillets are good, but where are the heads? Where are the backbones? So I stopped filleting them. I just belly gutted them, and if there's any eggs, I left them there, but brought them that, right? And they needed that, and I was so happy to provide it for them. But for others that are living in Chilliwack or Abbotsford or Langley or Vancouver, walking into White Spot or wherever for 3 meals a day, it really impacted them, not only physically but mentally, right? So that diet and traditional diet is a huge piece of what it is that we have to do there. And what we will be doing in our plan here is trying to be as proactive as possible. Once our Hílekw Sq'eq'o is more firmly established, I'd love to go out to the nations, all the nations in BC, because we're in the Lower Mainland. Just about anything happens anywhere in BC, they end up here one way or another, right? I'd like to establish protocols with other tribal councils, other nations, other major service providers, that if you have an issue up here, here's Debbie Coombs's email and contact information. She's the one that can connect you to our communities, to our supports down here and whatnot. And then maintain that relation over time, so that coming back to one of the biggest failings of the ESS right now, when Lytton and other events happened, nobody knew where everybody was. Which is crazy, because we've been through this, not necessarily Lytton, but we've been through crises like this repeatedly over the years, yet there's no system in place to identify people, to track people. Well, luckily, with the development of the First Nations Health Authority, for those of you outside of BC, we're responsible for our own health. We've got our own health governance platform. It's still growing, but we're pretty happy where it is. But that health program is pretty robust, and they started reaching out to identify where the elders are, what prescriptions, medications they should be on that they don't because they had to leave on a moment's notice, those kind of things, right? So health really stepped up and occupied that space effectively. We need to entrench that in the system, Lily, that the health supports it. ideally there'd be additional resources come on stream from health in times of crisis. So for me, and there is more, but those are the three keystone ones that we will be imparting into a new ESS model that we're developing ourselves.
Let's go ahead, John. Great to have you here today.
Hello everyone, and thank you, Chief Tyrone, for speaking to hosting the Littonites and everyone who is displaced. My name's Jana Jansen, and I'm the administrative manager for Kanakabar Indian Band, who are also in Tselhqot'in for everyone's context. Yep. So Kanakabar didn't lose any homes, but people were displaced and had to be evacuated there. And yeah, I'll just reflect, people were really grateful to have the opportunity to be hosted by the Stolo and to have that cultural connection, because it was so disorienting, leaving your home, not knowing if you're coming back to a home, all of that. And then it was really useful to have the Camp Hope for everyone to be together. Like I was willing to host people in my own home, but they said, no, I really need to be with my people. Yep. I need to be present together. So I just wanted to share one of the things that the Tselhqot'in are working on right now is having a more unified approach to emergency management and preparation, because this fire experience really revealed that we've been very disjointed. And so it is a struggle, though, like overcoming a lot of political history and funding issues and like all of these pieces. It's a big struggle, and I've been really impressed with how the emergencies have kind of opened up this conversation again, and people are really interested in collaborating. But yeah, it's definitely a process to get there, unfortunately.
We've got a couple hundred years the Indian Act to overcome. And for those of you in other parts of the Canada, appreciating you've got 400 and 500 years. For us here, it's really 175 to 200 years of too much contact. I'm too used to chairing, Lily. David has his hand up.
Yes, absolutely. And Julia as well. So please go ahead.
Hello, my name's Julia Monroe, and I'm with Tselhqot'in Health here in Merritt. We actually service 12 of the bands in our Tselhqot'in Nation. And one of the things that I would like to express is the staff mental health of the workers, and just keeping that in mind. I'm actually from Lytton, so I was affected by that, and I worked for 2 weeks straight, about 16 hours a day at the ESS. And then we are also affected by the floods here in Merritt, so that we worked through that as well. And then that took extreme mental health for our entire office. So just keeping that in mind with mental health space training and turning off devices. And it is hard, but keeping that in mind. Do you have anything in place for that, and just keeping that in mind for the future? Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. We're building that out. What I didn't have a chance to share in our 31 community model, we're breaking that 31 into 4 hubs. So one hub, say I'm from Seabird here, a hub here in Seabird, which has about 450 employees. I think Seabird delivers health to 19 communities, Julia, so pretty good health capacity there. But the hub hosted here in Seabird, but trained from the 10 Stalo communities around us. So if we have to start an EOC, you might have somebody from Seabird doing a position for 2, 3, 4, 5 days. And then they swapped out from somebody from Schwathel. And it swapped out from somebody from Squamish, from Hílekw, from Chiam and whatnot. So we're sharing it, right? And I'm up against the wall a little bit there. And some of you locals might be aware of this, that you know, each of our communities wants to strike their own EOC, for example, their own command post. I go, gee whiz, we're all impacted. Why don't we strike one EOC and then share the duty of it? Okay, we're all related. We're all working too hard. You know, it'll benefit all of us. And especially in today's age where you don't actually, and Tuathal, Camp Hope is 15 minutes from me. Camp Hope is right immediately adjacent to Tuathal, but you don't even have to drive the 20 minutes from Tuathal to Seabird. You know, get on a computer, open it up, and now you're in our EOC, right? So take advantage of technology too. When it's available, appreciating during certain events, it may not be available, but we're building that in. Not well, I shouldn't say not, kind of responding to the mental health side of things, Julia, but I feel strongly that if we balance the workload for everybody, that mental health strain decreases naturally. But then in that, we also want to come back to, for me, education is called professional development, right? Our teachers, our principals are constantly receiving regular professional development. So when we're building out the skills and competencies to occupy those seats, those positions, those responsibilities, how do we develop a professional development type scenario? It may not be called that, but to those of us in education, it's called Pro-D, right? That promotes self-care. That gives and provides people tools and space to look after themselves in your regular work sense, absolutely, but also in that spiritual aspect to it. Like, well, why can't, as a part of that mental health, bring our EOC folks out on, for we're river people down here. Bring them out on the bank of a river and barbecue a fish for the afternoon as a way to rebuild them, right? So that absolutely will be in there. May not specifically be aimed at mental health, but more individual self-awareness, individual self-care, and group self-care. And we're not there yet, Julia, but that's absolutely on our radar. Thanks.
If I may, I just have a quick response to Julia. Julia, it's good to see you here. I just wanted to check and make sure that you know about the WOWM gathering happening on the 22nd at the Kamsheen Gym. For everyone's context, we are in recognition that mental health is really difficult and everyone's been under so much strain, especially the caregivers. So anyone who worked in emergency management or the cultural wellness workers, spiritual wellness workers, they've been basically without support this entire time since the fires, and everyone's quite burnt out or getting close because it hasn't ended, right? There's still a lot of fallout here. So the purpose of this WOWM gathering is to gather all of those support workers together so that they can find support themselves and network and not be as isolated. And we're also leading a project to gather stories of people who were displaced by the fires and floods and washouts. So, but yeah, as a major part of that, it's supporting those people who gave so much of themselves and continue to give so much of themselves.
It's really good you're doing that, Shannon, because down this way, especially the ladies, for some reason there's more ladies involved. It's just I don't know why, but really strong, powerful ladies that I've known for decades, right? Really breaking down on calls, sharing information, because it's wearing them out. So that kind of approach, I think we need to build into our regular event. It may not be, and I'm not telling you what to do in any way, but it may not be like a national event once a year. It might be, for us, it'll be probably more effective to do a sub-regional effective 3 times a year or 4 times a year, because the better we bolster and support and promote that mental health, physical health side and all the workers, the better they're going to be, at work and at home too.
Thank you for all these thoughts. My name is Sarah Kamal, and I've been working on the project that Jana has been talking about with Kanakanabar Indian Band and several other communities in the Hílekw region. And as Jana mentioned, we've been working on actually supporting the existing strengths of all the traditional and spiritual healers to bring them together and have them aware of each other, because very often they're working 24/7 and maybe there's ongoing issues that need to be addressed and they're really stretched thin. So just knowing who everybody else is so important. And then also having the chance to have community conversations amongst themselves, because so many of the issues are very specific to a particular region. People know each other, what they've been through, and having that chance to have those conversations is so important. So as Jana mentioned, given all the impacts of the many fires in Lytton, and as well as November 21st, there's been few chances for everybody who's been scattered to come back together. So our effort, as she mentioned, on January 22nd, we're having one gathering, which is really for leadership to talk about how to move forward with these kinds of projects. And then we're hoping to have a series, actually. So for Julia and anybody else who might be in the region, if this would be of interest, the idea is to have the community have a chance to come back together in Lytton itself and talk about what's happened over the last few years, and have that conversation matter, both in terms of coming back to community because it has been lost and it was so precious, but also the stories and solutions that we hope to gather are actually going to be collated into a report that we then hope to share with the federal government, and to have informed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Action Plan for 2023. So we have already an agreement with Justice Canada to be bringing those stories from Lytton, folks who want to share their stories from the community, to go and affect, hopefully, what is exactly Chief Tyrone you mentioned, which is that enormous gap that there is no policy to deal with displacement when it's longer term. And it has impacted so many communities who have been away from home for 10 years or more in some cases. And it's not enough to not have any kind of a solution. So we are also looking at other policy reports that have been given out in the past by other Indigenous nations. There are quite a few already. So we're bringing and compiling all of these together to have kind of a one-stop shop, hopefully, for policymakers and others who might be interested to take a look at the experience of Indigenous communities and how we can make things better. So I'll just put my contact information in the chat. And if anybody has any pointers, places, guidance that they would like to share that might go into that report, we'd be so delighted to have that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm thinking, like, you know, in a couple other hats that I wear, I'm a special advisor to the Leadership Council on Emergency Management. I'm an advisor to the province on emergency management. I'm developing a pretty tight relation with the Department of Justice as leads on the United Nations Declaration Act Action Plan. So if possible, I'd love to come to that event and listen and maybe even participate, because I think that'll help both of us. And then on top of that, coming back to the advisor to the LC, we've got Chief's direction to create a BC-wide regional action plan. And when we got that direction, I reached out and we got support from Chiefs to develop 3 Chiefs committees, leadership committees, one specifically on wildfire, one specifically on flood, and one specifically on the marine side of things. Because too often we're brought into one meeting, my concern is flood, your concern is wildfire, my concern over here are king tides and tidal waves, and we're jammed in. So we're trying to tease that apart a little bit. So I think I could help you, and you could really help me in those kinds of discussions. Sarah,
that would be wonderful. I will get in touch with Chief Jordan of Kanakabar and have him send you an invite. And yeah, I think one of our concerns also is the many other forms of disaster that are experienced by Indigenous communities and post-disaster disasters. I mean, there are so many ongoing cascading impacts. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
I just wanted to echo what Sarah just said there, especially around post-disaster disasters and kind of that ongoing chain, recognizing that we've been doing lots of work with that, the context and the consultant with geohazards. But my question to you, Chief Tyrone, was really like, what is the practical aspects of what capacity is looking like, and especially as folks who, I'm a professional that deals with geohazards from the science side, what does that look like in terms of building capacity for First Nations, and what are some of the things that we can do practically to help build some of that capacity?
Thanks, Carrie. What we're proposing down here is a lot of the professional supports that are required. We'll bring to the table and help us draft out scenarios and options and provisions and even business cases. And then we'll present that to our communities that, you know, they have a lot of trust and confidence in us and in the staff that we have working for us, that, you know, community, you don't have to do this. Here it is, you know, the bulk of it is here. We'll work with you to localize it, but the bulk of it is there. And then secondly, if we're talking about especially the dynamic analysis aspect of what it is we're trying to forecast, what the river is going to do, what this creek, you know, those kind of things to do, it'd be so much easier if our EPS office brought in a couple of engineers that worked on behalf of all 31 communities, that did that work for those 31 communities at no cost to them. So efficiencies in terms of what I might describe as that real high level expertise, capacity, and experience, and then the other side of it is really around the development of a plan of a plan scenario that I always promote regional. Let's be regional, but to be relevant to each community, we need to localize it to each community. But if we do those hand in hand, a lot of that professional support, that high-end capacity that we don't have, we could bring to bear to help folks get there. And then at the same time, keep in mind, I'm education, right? I want to put in incentives for our citizens of all ages to learn to take on advanced degrees across the board here too. Because like I'm dealing with an issue in I think I might have shared already, a fish bearing creek right here in Seabird. And I'd love to have a First Nations biologist come out there and walk the stream with me. First Nations environmental officers out there and walk the streams and, you know, to tell me, you know, we need to do A, B, C, D kind of thing. Right now, we need to rely on others. Absolutely. I like that they're there, but who better to do it than ourselves? So it really incentivizes that kind of the educational advancement for our members is huge for me.
Thank you.
Thank you for this presentation. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate. My name is Joel and I work for Health Emergency Management, British Columbia. And I was curious if you could speak a little bit on the relationship with provincial agencies that like health. I'm not a part of the First Nations Health Authority, and I work for PHSA, the Provincial Health Services Authority. And in our preparedness work with health emergency management, sometimes we find ourselves at a loss at the best way to liaise with all the First Nations, especially in the eastern part of the Fraser Valley. And I was curious if you could speak to what Building Back Better looks like if we're talking about relationships with provincial agencies like health.
I think you and I need to connect after this, Joel, because I am in the eastern Fraser Valley, based in Seabird here, so I could fill a lot of gaps there at the click of a button. But whether it's Build Back Better or the Hílekw Sq'eq'o, what we have in our mind here is that we're building Mainland Coast Salish capacity in such a way that you as health, you're a service provider to me, to us. Let's develop a protocol, a communications protocol, a support service protocol. First Nations Emergency Service Society, who I promote, but I tell them directly, if there's an issue, you guys parachute in, do something, then you're gone again. We're not going anywhere. So we're going to build capacity. Finesse, you're going to be a service provider for us as described in this protocol. First Nations Health Authority, the new ministry on emergency management here, EMCR, ISC, and you know, anybody, everybody else, because I think that's the piece that's missing more broadly, Joel. And I see that in a number of hats that I wear, is that we don't know what we don't know. So if we develop a strategy here that informs health, here's our 4 hubs. If you have an issue in the Fraser Valley, here's a hub in Seaward Island that's brought 10 communities together working commonly. Here's a title, an email, a contact for you to reach into. Because so much of that, and I field requests regularly on like right across the board. I'm having this issue in this part of the province. Who can I talk to? Well, here's a chief's contact information. Here's a band manager. Here's a health director contact information. And away you go. So the piece that I'm trying to describe there, Joel, is when we're completing our plan to the point we make it public, you could look at it as a public service provider and realize that if you're in say the Lower Mainland, here's the hub, here's the person, here's the contact information. You reach out and this is the most critical piece, Joel. Develop relations. So you reach out, you find out who the contact is, you have a chat, you give your background, they give their background, and then you touch base on a regular basis. Because if there's 2 things that we need to overcome here, especially in an emergency situation, is we need to overcome the current inability or lack of ability to communicate effectively. Because you don't know who in our community to reach out to. Just using you as one example, Joe. Well, now you're going to know. Your whole team's going to know. And secondly, the ability to respond to a question or a concern. In your case, health emergency, you might see something coming down the pipe. They reach out to one of our contacts. You have a conversation. No, we're good, thanks. But now we're aware, right? So the relations is a foundation of both of those. So it's going to be a critical piece of what it is that we're going forward, bringing forward as well. Does that help, Joe?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put my contact information in the chat if you'd like to connect after.
Mm-hmm. Mine's in there already.
Tyrone, maybe I'll just ask one question since you mentioned it about kind of challenging the current funding models that are not designed around the needs of the communities. What would be some of the key steps you would do, since we have quite a bit of provincial and federal government on the call here? What would be some of those steps?
Firstly, it's all proposal driven, and it's ad hoc and it's responsive. We need the funding to be more proactive. Say, for example, here in the Fraser Valley, as a part of Hílekw Sq'eq'o, we'll develop a resilience strategy that says you need to move this dike back. You have to remove this dike completely and modify the landscape like this. So when we build that, when we agree on it, government will know what the cost is. So that then we're informing government, this is what our need is. All we need out of you, BC and Canada, is money. We don't need nothing else. Because right now, it's their policies are restrictive. The nature of competitive proposals is restrictive. The inability of First Nations to respond effectively to requests for proposals, because we don't have engineers sitting beside us like local governments do in regional districts, right? So it's about being proactive, building a regional action plan that is based on resilience and that broad ecological footprint, and getting agreement on it by government, by locals, and then costing it out. Because I'm pretty confident that when we're done our plan here to actually implement it, we're probably talking $8-10 billion, somewhere in that neighborhood. No government's going to come up with that overnight. That's going to be a 5-year funding strategy or 10-year funding strategy, but it's something real that government folks can put on their desk and learn to understand, and then eventually learn to support financially. So it's twofold. One is being proactive in our design, proactive in our funding request, but modify funding policies and funding methodologies to align with and accommodate those strategies. So here's a strategy from Yale to Semiahmoo to Squamish. The Hílekw have your strategy over there. The Blackfoot and Alberta have their strategies. I'd really encourage nation-based or treaty-based solutions, right? Get away from the Indian Act. Let's work together and build it out that way. And one, we're so much stronger as a collective, as a collaborative. Two, our inherent rights largely are based on tribes, nations, broader collaborations than individual communities. I know not all of our leaders agree with that, but I'm going to continue promoting that. We're bigger than the Indian Act. Is that what you're looking for, Lynn?
That's even much more. Thank you so much, Tyrone, for always taking it to the next level. All right, any final comments or wrap up? Really grateful for the time that was spent together today. I just wanted to offer Debbie also a word. Debbie, if you wanted to share something today as well. And as Chief Tyrone said, the women carry the brunt of this work often. And Sendai priority number 4 actually calls for women's leadership. So it's wonderful to hear that.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm sick. That's why I have my camera off. But, with the emergency management, I got into it because I helped with the Lytton First Nation fire. I was working at the EOC at Camp Hope for 3.5 weeks. I have family up in Lytton. I have relations up there. And it didn't scare me away from emergency management. It got me into emergency management. It gave me a passion to help people. And I started taking as much training as I could. So if an event or disaster ever happens in the lower Fraser Valley here, I want to be prepared. I want to be ready to help people, because I felt like I wasn't prepared when I went to the EOC at Camp Hope. And it broke my heart that I couldn't help the way I wanted to. It still hurts me today to see a lot of my relations up there. They don't have a home anymore. They're still living in a hotel or a motel, or they're living in a different town that isn't home. And that's where the government has to step in and say, okay, you lost your home. Let's get it back right away, instead of taking the time that it's taken to bring these people home. Home is where the heart is. And when you're not home, you don't have a heart, you're lost. And a lot of these Lytton First Nation people are lost. And a lot of them are my family and my friends. And emergency management to me is so important for people to learn, because when a disaster happens, you may think you're prepared, but when it happens, your mind goes in the other direction. You don't know what to do. You have to concentrate on what the disaster is, how you could help, and you have to be strong-minded. And I feel like that disaster happening to my friends and relatives made me a stronger person, to have the passion to help, instead of running away and thinking, okay, I can't help. I don't know what to do. I thought, I'm going to get as much training as I can to help people. And that's where I got into Emergency Planning Secretariat. They started having training sessions, and I got invited to the sessions, and I was all for it. And I'm still all for it. And I'll always be there to help people. I think that's all I have to say, but I'm very strong-minded on emergency management, and we need to get more people involved.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for the love and care that you bring, and thank you very much for the work that you do. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We will be sharing the recording of this circle. Thank you so much, Chief Tyrone. This was incredible. Debbie, everyone who asked wonderful questions. A lot of love and gratitude is being shared in the chat. So thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.